This morning we are continuing the sermon series Christianish, in which we have been looking at some of the beliefs and practices in modern Christianity that we find are perhaps not so much Christian as they are Christian-ish. So far we've talked about the weirdness of some of the rules that we have established in church culture and how they've changed over time. And last week we looked at the somewhat dangerous blending of faith and politics, in which both of those things can impinge on the other's purpose. This morning, we're going to talk about the church's judgmentalism. And I know, and you know, we all know that this church isn't judgmental. No one here has ever been made to feel less than for who they are, the choices they make, the mistakes they've made in the past. No one here has ever been judged by their appearance or their profession or the car they drive or the behavior of their children. I know that that is not a problem here, right? Thank you for laughing. Yes, it's a problem everywhere. And even if it weren't a problem here at Monte Sano United Methodist Church, there is a perception in the wider world that churches are judgmental. And that perception, whether it is correct or incorrect, we know that perception is reality for many people. So it's something that we have to deal with, something that we have to acknowledge and confess together as a church. The Barna Research Group, which is a group of smart people that do a lot of church statistics and polls among people, a few years ago did a poll of 18 to 29-year-olds, asking them the words that they thought best described the church in their opinion. Among the top 3 descriptive words that these 18 to 29-year-olds chose was judgmental. The other 2 were anti-gay and hypocritical, if you're wondering. Not a great reputation that the church has in the world and among young people. The reality for most of us is that if you've been in church long enough, you have experienced or will experience or have seen it in the life of someone else, someone expressing a judgmental attitude. We have a judgment problem. Jesus seems to acknowledge that this is an issue throughout Scripture, especially in today's passage, which is oft quoted, often abused. Judge not, lest ye be judged. Our culture loves this verse. Even if you are in no way, shape, or form attached to church or faith, we hear this again and again and again by people. You can't judge me. You don't know me. Can't nobody judge me but God. You don't get to judge me. But the problem is, if we can't judge anything, then this verse means that Jesus is just saying, well, anything goes. We can't throw all judgment out the window because not all judgment is bad. In fact, judgment is necessary. It's necessary in our lives, in our work, in our relationships, in our survival. We need to be able to discern and investigate and understand things. Our forebears needed to be able to judge whether that thing coming toward them through the grass was a tiger or a house cat. You got to judge that. We need to judge our children's behavior as acceptable or unacceptable. Stop acting a fool. Bosses need to be able to judge an employee's job performance. We need to use our judgment in our friendships. We need to be able to ask, hey, do you all think Karen's okay? Should we check on her? In order to love other people, we have to look into their lives and be interested in their needs, and that requires a certain amount of judgment. Now, the issue is that word for judgment is not the word that Jesus is using in today's passage. The Greek word for judgment or to judge that Jesus is using in today's passage has an entirely different meaning. The word that Jesus is using means to condemn or to damn someone. And unfortunately, Christians have long found themselves in this slide between discernment into condemnation. Judgment has a long history of being a wonderful way to express social control. It allows us to keep people in boundaries. Whether it was shame and shunning in communities, excommunication in churches, or simple ostracizing among middle school girls, it has a great way of working. The needle moves, though, and it moves a little too far, and the faithful find their role moving from that of being sincerely interested in others to being supervisors of morality and conduct. We become censorious, if you want to have a fancy word for it. And we become arrogant and hypocritical. And we often express a stunning lack of self-awareness as we focus all of our energy on others and little to none on ourselves. There's a preacher story I'm going to tell. It's a preacher story, so that probably means it's not true, but hear it anyway. There is a story of a Wall Street businessman who is dating a young, beautiful Hollywood starlet. And as their relationship progressed, the businessman fell deeper and deeper in love with this young woman, and he decided that he was on the verge of getting ready to ask her to marry him. But he was very concerned about his reputation, and he hired a private investigator to investigate this young woman to make sure that she didn't have anything in her past that would be troublesome for their future together. After a few weeks, the PI came to the businessman and said, "I have found no red flags in her past. Her dating history is impeccable, but there is one thing." The businessman dared to ask, "What is it?" And she says, "Lately she has been seen in the company of a shady Wall Street businessman." If we are to say anything about others, we have to work on ourselves first. We become so obsessed with the actions of others that we ignore the log, the plank, the beam, depending on the translation you have, in our own eyes. We inflate our own ability to perceive the goodness or evil of another person. And we fall prey to what is the original sin that we find in Genesis. You remember Adam and Eve back in the first book of the Bible. Their sin was trying to understand as God understands the difference between good and evil. They wanted the ability to judge as God judges. This is the same thing that we find happening in our church culture and in our larger culture at the moment. In church, we often find well-intentioned church members acting as the gatekeepers of morality. And in our culture right now, we stand on the cusp of this strange thing that's becoming known as cancel culture, where if someone is judged to have a questionable or unpopular opinion or exhibits a sinful behavior, that person is boycotted, shamed, and shunned. There is no forgiveness. There is no coming back. The people in this culture will actively work to destroy that person's life, career, and relationships. This happens to celebrities and everyday citizens. One picture, one text, one word, and poof, you're canceled. Cultural excommunication. And for some, depending on the severity of their offense, we think to ourselves, well, good. They deserve it. But I wonder what we would think if we were on the other side of the situation, if we were the ones who had made the mistake, who had sinned against a brother or sister, who had done something wrong. You see, we have this tendency to magnify the sins of others while simultaneously ignoring or laughing off our own. We want mercy for ourselves, and we want judgment for others. You have experienced this on the highway, when perhaps you were going somewhere between 8 and 10 miles per hour over the speed limit, and you crested that hill, and you saw that police officer with her radar gun, and you begged the Most High God that she would be lenient and not come out after you. And then a few miles down the road, you saw that guy with the car from the Fast and the Furious who flew by you at 100 miles per hour, and the police car came blazing after them with blue lights going, and you said, "Go get him, officer. Throw the book at him. Fullest extent of the law. Highest ticket you can give him. If you need to get him out of the car, maybe kick him a few times. That's fine." Our ability to speak into the life of another is greatly dependent upon our ability to see what is broken in our own lives. But before you start thinking, "John, I have confessed my sins. I have repented of my brokenness, and now I am ready to lay the spiritual smackdown on my friends and neighbors. You might want to read the scripture one more time. Because the way I read these verses, I see a further call for compassion and care in how we actually dare to speak into the life of another. Think about this. Have you ever had a stranger, someone who you aren't friends with, invade your personal space a little bit? Not in a big way, not even a malicious way, just something small. They may have even been trying to help you. Maybe you were standing there and you felt someone pick a piece of lint off your shoulder and you just kind of weren't ready for someone to touch you. Maybe you felt someone fix the tag on the back of your shirt and you went, "Oh, who's touching me?" Maybe you got a hug that was a little too tight or a little too long. You know, even minor infractions like that can feel violating to some people. That's just physical space. Now imagine if someone is judging your behavior, your choices, your actions, who you are, who you love, how you parent, the quality of your work. I don't think it's a mistake that Jesus uses the image of eyes in today's scripture. Say you had something in your eye. Who would you want to come help you get it out? Do you want some stranger, some clumsy guy with big fat fingers poking around in your eyeball? No. I know many of you have had procedures on your eyes, LASIK surgery, cataract surgery. And let me tell you, I have talked to you, you all research your doctors. You want to make sure that you have the best, most qualified person monkeying around with your eyeballs. Because your eyes are sensitive. Have you ever tried to give eye drops to a toddler? It's like wrestling an alligator. Because nobody wants someone messing with their eyes. That's your ability to see. You can mess up my knee replacement and I can't run, but you mess up my eyes and I can't see. That's scary. Getting something out of someone else's eye is an act of compassion. So long as both parties agree and they are working on it together. If that's not the case, you're not being compassionate. That's assault. And the church, in its long and storied history, has been clumsy in its attempts to help people remove the specks from their eyes. It has ignored the call for empathy and compassion, intimacy and trust in this work in favor of hellfire and brimstone and judgment and condemnation and strangers speaking into someone's life who they don't trust or know or understand. Sometimes those in the church speak too much truth with too little love. Truth without love runs the risk of being abusive and oppressive. And love without truth means that we never say anything is wrong. Far too often, it seems that we are more concerned with holding people to our expectations than we are with connecting those people to God's purposes. In these situations, we begin to think that virtue is the opposite of sin, but as the great author and writer Philip Yancey once said, the opposite is truly grace, not virtue. Grace is the opposite of sin. Your strength of conviction has to be matched and I think exceeded by the depth of your compassion. We have to embrace and refuse to abandon, and we have to do the hard work of remembering that we do not all have a monopoly on truth. There are people in the sanctuary, in the pews in front and behind and beside you who believe differently than you do on a great number of different topics. And their faith in God and their conviction around those beliefs is as strong as yours. And we can't help but think, I just cannot understand how you believe that. That's right. You don't understand. I don't understand. And most people are completely unwilling to try to understand another point of view, another belief, another scriptural interpretation. And in those cases, it falls on the Christ follower to love their neighbor anyway. Whether you agree with them or not, whether they ever change or not. Because we can often find our hearts broken over one piece of a person, and we find ourselves ignoring or neglecting the wholeness of who they are. In the end, we are not fit to judge someone ultimately. That is God's job. And he did not appoint us to that position. The only person whose behavior we can truly judge, who we can truly change, is our own. And therefore, we should reserve that judgment for ourselves and practice an endless grace with others that allows us to continue to speak God's truth and God's purposes into their lives and does not send them away more broken than when they entered in. There are far too many places in this world where others will find judgment. I pray that in this space, we would see the opportunity to work together. That as we learn to love one another, we would learn how to help one another, to care for one another in a way that is seen as cooperative, that is seen as spiritually enriching, that is seen as love in action.